Hey friends, it's Mal. Welcome back to my channel. We have arrived back at my Bratchett School of Electional Astrology. Welcome back. There's something about these electional videos that I really enjoy. I like to take a look at elections in retrospect. I think that's part of learning electional astrology. It's not just about putting the chart together, but it's also more obviously about experiencing how the chart actually plays out. And I have had no formal or traditional training in electional astrology. Everything I know about electional astrology comes from the free resources from Chris Brennan and the Astrology Podcast. And I've really just learned a lot from electing a ton of stuff and putting it into action and actually seeing how these things play out. I might be electing things to an unhealthy amount lately, but what can I say? I don't know. There's something about electional astrology. It's kind of addicting to me. And this summer specifically, I had sort of a road trip kind of thing that I elected, and I also elected a time for my friend to depart on her road trip. So we're going to talk about all three of these charts and maybe hearing about my stories and my reviews of my own elections perhaps will help you maybe elect a time for your next trip, because I think trips are especially those things that are worth electing a time. At least in my eyes, like I wouldn't want to leave during the day as Mars is rising or anything like that, so I think it is worth it to kind of maybe double check, leave a little bit earlier if you can, if that means that your ascendant is going to be conjunctive benefic, or leave a little bit later if that means that the ruler of your third and ninth houses is really well placed. Okay, so I do really think travel is definitely one of those things in life that is worth electing. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into my few stories here. So I'm going to start off with the election that I elected for my friend who was going on a big summer road trip with her partner to visit various Great Lakes in the US. So she actually had a specific day where she wanted to depart. She wanted to depart on June 26th. So sometimes this happens with electional astrology. Our client, or in this case, my friend, has a specific day she wanted to leave. So for me, as the electional astrologer, I, I'm a little bit limited with what I can do, right? And if we know any rules of electional astrology, we know the moon is very important. And specifically on this day, June 26th, the moon was in Capricorn, right? So the moon is in its detriment. So as the electional astrologer, I'm already kind of thinking, ooh, ouchie, like, like, all right, we got to leave on June 26th. The moon isn't necessarily in like its best sign, but what can we do to make this work, right? Because going back to like what I think students are learning to understand about electional astrology, it's not about finding the perfect time. It's about finding the optimal time. And those are two very different things, right? Because the optimal time is not perfect, but the optimal time can be about optimizing on certain things that could be beneficial in the chart, right? So I'm already thinking, what can we do with this Capricorn moon conjunct Pluto? Okay. And then I see here, I'm kind of sniffing around the chart and I'm thinking, oh, wait, but here's a saving grace. Venus is in Cancer, right? And Venus is in the moon sign. So technically in this chart, the moon has reception with Venus, right? So in a way, this is kind of a mitigating factor. Maybe this moon in detriment isn't going to be so bad, or perhaps it could even become a benefit to the chart. And it did. And I will get into that in a moment. But as we can see, June 26th, the morning of June 26th, Venus is at their anaretic degree, 29 degrees Cancer. And the moon is actually approaching that opposition with Venus, which I don't hate. And I'm really looking and I'm seeing how can we make this moon a little bit better? Like, how can we optimize this the best way we can, right? So I'm thinking, okay, they're leaving probably sometime in the morning. If we kind of scoot around here for a second, hang on, let me get my clicker back over here. But if we scoot around for a moment, we can see like, okay, around 7 a.m., we have the ascendant in Cancer. And that's already seeming like a good option, right? And now if we scoot more like at 8 o'clock, now we're going to have a Leo rising with Mars close to the ascendant. That's kind of a deal breaker for me, especially that because we're doing a road trip. And then we're going to have the ruler of the ascendant in the 7th house, or sorry, in the 12th house. And that's also kind of given me not great vibes. Okay. So I'm thinking, okay, the earlier time set around 7 a.m. is looking a lot better. We have Venus, although the benefic out of sect, still a benefic, conjunct the ascendant. We have the moon, who is the ruler of the ascendant, approaching an opposition with Venus. Okay. I'm thinking, all right, this feels kind of good. Another thing that we could look at in this chart that feels good for a trip is the fact that Jupiter is at 2 degrees Pisces in the 9th house. And here we have one of our other travel houses, the 3rd house, is ruled by Mercury in the 12th. Now, normally, okay, we're looking Mercury in the 12th, maybe not so great, but here Mercury is in Gemini in its domicile, right? So that's kind of given me some good feelings, at least it's in its domicile. And then we have another travel house, the 6th house being ruled by Jupiter. So I kind of like this. I like that all of the travel houses, the 3rd and 9th primarily, but also the 12th and 6th, they are ruled by planets in their domicile. Okay, so that is giving me, there's a flow there. That's giving me intuitive feelings that this is going to be a good election. And lastly, just for shits and giggles, let's look at what would happen if I had my friend leave a little bit later at like 10 a.m. Okay, so this wouldn't have been that bad either, right? We have the ascendant ruled by Mercury in its domicile in the 10th. We have Jupiter conjunct the descendant, which is great. But now the travel houses aren't as great. Like they're still okay, but they're not as great as that earlier time. Because now we have the 3rd house being ruled by Mars in the 12th. I don't know about that. Now we have Saturn in the 6th house. Now the moon has moved into Aquarius. So we no longer have that mutual reception, or I should actually say it's just reception with Venus. Okay. The 9th house of travel is ruled by Venus, but also now we've got Uranus there, and there's something about that I don't love for a road trip. Okay. So ultimately, I tell my friend, It's actually my recommendation that she leaves from her destination between 7 a.m. and 7:40 a.m. So within that 40 minutes, the ascendant will be pretty close to Venus, okay? And we have that nice reception between Venus and the moon. Okay, so here's how this trip worked out. She actually reported back that they had no car issues. All of their drives to and from the Great Lakes actually went really well. They kind of did like a camping thing in between. So the actual driving and the literal traveling part of the trip went really well. She reported back there was only one one sort of snafu near the Grand Canyon where they did briefly get pulled over, but it wasn't for speeding. The officer pulled them over just for not having their lights on, even though it was still dusk. So I don't know, but they didn't get a ticket. It was just a warning. That was really the only thing that driving wise that went wrong, quote unquote. Everything else went really smoothly. And it's so funny because here I'll tell you how this Venus opposition moon and this Pluto conjunct the moon actually worked out. When I was calling my friend and she was telling me a little bit more about what happened on the road trip, she actually reported back that her and her partner had some really serious relationship conversations when they were on this road trip about, becoming more serious and future plans. Did I mention she was on this road trip with her partner? I hope I did, but I'll mention it now. Yeah. So I feel like that's actually the moon Pluto thing. Like the relationship actually got more intense and committed after the road trip, which is actually a good thing. I feel like if you want to put your relationship to a test, just go on a road trip with them and see if you kill each other, right? So the fact that they didn't kill each other with moon Pluto conjunction in the seventh, great thing, right? It's actually a great testament to the relationship, I think. And I'm trying to think if there were any other highlights of the trip. This friend did tweak her ankle at some point while they were hiking. And maybe that's something about the third house being ruled by Mercury in the 12th. But also, I almost hesitate to say that because this friend tweaks her ankle so much that I don't know. I don't know if this is necessarily relevant. And another interesting thing that came out of this trip, a sort of unexpected thing, is that after this friend got back from the road trip, she kind of made this almost spontaneous decision, this sort of very intuitively inspired decision to apply and go to grad school because this friend is a teacher. And I thought that was also interesting too, because Jupiter again is in the ninth house, and the ninth house isn't only about travel, it's also about higher education, right? So it's kind of weird that like the end of this trip, like they finish up the trip together and she has this like intuitive impulse, like I'm going back to grad school, right? It's kind of interesting. And the last thing I'll mention about this chart, when it comes to how this chart actually lines up with this friend's natal chart, I actually think it lines up pretty well, just because she is a Capricorn moon and she also is a Pisces rising. So it's kind of interesting that the ninth house is highlighted because the ninth house in this chart is her first house, and the seventh house in this chart is her 11th house. And this chart was also somehow maybe probably like a day after her lunar return. So I think that's kind of nice if we can get like the moon somehow configured to the native's chart, or something about the chart being configured to the native's ascendant kind of feels good to me. So overall, I'm giving myself snaps, for electing this and finding this time, because I think it actually went really well. Okay. So let's actually talk about my road trip. So at the end of June, I left to visit my friend. And I planned on staying with her for about a week. It's about a 5-hour drive from my house to her house. So I was thinking, yes, we definitely should elect a time to leave for this friend's house, right? So I actually kind of decided on a Libra rising chart ruled by Venus in the 11th, because it's me going to visit my friend. And also, when I was kind of thinking about the election for this trip, I was thinking about my friend's chart, her natal chart, and I was thinking, like, well, she actually is a Libra rising ruled by Venus in Leo, right? So she was kind of going through her Venus return as I'm visiting, right? So it's almost like I kind of was like, let's configure almost her Venus return in the 11th with my trip to her house. So it's actually kind of nice that we could get that in the election in some way. Now, I think at some point I was considering leaving at a little bit earlier and making this trip more of a Virgo rising, but ultimately I decided against it. And I think it was because, again, when we have the Virgo rising, we have the third house and the ninth house. So those travel houses being ruled by that Venus approaching Mars in the 12th. And there was something about that I didn't love. I don't love kind of this that 12th house being highlighted in that electional chart. And the ancient astrologers did associate both the 6th house and 12th house with like more unfortunate travel situations, right? Whereas like the 3rd house, 9th house are a little bit more of like the fortunate travel situations, right? So I was thinking, it's an option, but I'm not sure if I love it. In retrospect, I almost wonder, like, should I have went with this? Because this is one of those things that didn't actually completely work out the way I wanted it to. So I did end up leaving as Libra was, or as at a 6 degrees Libra rising. That's when I departed from my house. And, in retrospect, yes, like the chart was ruled by Venus in the 11th, but it wasn't just ruled by Venus in the 11th. It was ruled by Venus approaching a conjunction with Mars in the 11th, as both of these planets are also approaching a square with Uranus. So I feel like I kind of like didn't take that into account as much. And as for the moon in this chart, which is another really important part of an electional chart, the moon is conjunct Neptune in the 6th house, and it's in Pisces, and both me and my friend are Pisces moons. And I can just say on this trip, me and her were, I think, very much moody Pisces moons. Sort of we did what Pisces moons tend to do together, which is like cry together. So yeah, maybe that moon placement wasn't so great. Maybe it would have been better leaving at the Virgo rising with that moon in the 7th, because at least it would have been in a good house, right? But again, this is what I was thinking. I was thinking my travel houses were really good, and nothing went wrong with the car. Like nothing went wrong with like the actual travel. The travel was actually great. It was more the themes that popped up on this trip that ended up kind of being a little bit challenging. And without going into too much detail, this trip very much became the Venus kind of approaching that conjunction with Mars, very much focused on sort of tension and strife in certain relationships, not necessarily between me and my friend, but certain relationships in my friend's life that I was witnessing. And, you know, sometimes when you see your friend struggling with relationships in their own life, that can be like a really painful thing for a friend to like watch their friend go through, right? We've all had that experience where we're kind of like watching our friend kind of go through a little bit of a difficult time with their own relationships. And that was very much kind of a big thing that was on my mind when I was with my friend during this trip. Now, on a little bit of a lighter note, not a lighter note, but I had two failed dating attempts on this trip. You know, one involved someone that I was talking to in a bar, and another one involved kind of a failed dating app date thing that didn't actually end up working out. So I don't know, is that Venus approaching Mars? Probably. Is that Saturn in the fifth house? Probably. So it's interesting, both me and my friend were having our respective relationship struggles, hers in a much more serious way, mine in a little bit more of like a casual way. And yeah, it was kind of interesting. And I do think too, I was thinking a lot about my own love life in this on this trip for some reason, and maybe not even necessarily in a good way. Like, I think I was having a lot of realizations about what I truly want in a relationship, and whatever, like what exactly I'm ready for, and all of those questions. That could also be because Pluto is currently approaching my Venus in my natal chart. So maybe some big changes there. So it was very much a Venus approaching Mars kind of trip. And just to show y'all something really interesting is that we did go to a bar. What day was it? It was like, it was maybe like July 3rd or July 4th, and we did witness a bar fight. And oh shit, hang on. I think this is kind of funny because I'll show you. I mean, I think it's funny that this happened, even though it was kind of scary at the time. But yeah, like around I would say it would have been around like 2 a.m. or 3. Yeah, let's say, okay, let's say it was around like 3 a.m. July 4th. Me and my friend were kind of like getting ready to leave this bar. Um, and, you know, we witnessed this sort of moment of tension as this moon in Taurus was approaching the conjunction with Uranus. And two people we didn't even know kind of like broke out into a fight right in front of us. And I think that's a really interesting thing, like how that interacted with the actual election, because we have like that moon approaching Uranus, kind of activating the chart's Venus Mars conjunction. So I got to say, like Venus and Mars, what I learned from casting this chart is that I would actually suggest not using Venus and Mars as the main star of the show of your electional chart, especially during the day and especially when Venus is approaching Mars. I'm thinking that this probably could have worked out better if Venus had passed the conjunction with Mars, but ultimately that's what this election taught me. It was about like being wary of using Venus and Mars and highlighting Venus and Mars during the day. And one other thing I will say when it comes to how this chart lines up with my personal natal chart, so Mars in Leo is actually my out of sect malefic. So I don't know if I went wrong there. This happened during my Mars return. So I'm not sure if like highlighting my own out of sect malefic was a great idea in this chart. So maybe that was another reason why this trip was not a bad trip at all. I mean, I value seeing my friends so deeply. I'm so glad we got to connect. But I would just I think I would describe it as an intense trip filled with emotional depth and some power struggles, both within myself and power struggles that I witnessed outside of myself. And just a little bit of, I guess, heartbreak, not for my own failed dating attempts. I don't care about those, but I think some feelings, some pain in the heart for my own friend. Okay, in some ways. So that's kind of how this turned out. Now, last one, which I think I saved the best for last. Now, as I was leaving my friend's house, it's interesting because we met in college, and our college is actually only a couple hours away from her house. And I emailed my favorite professor and a couple days before I was leaving my friend's house, and I said, hey, I might kind of pass through Greencastle, which is where I went to college, the town I went to college in. I said I might kind of pass through Greencastle on my way back home from my friend's house. Are you in town? Can we meet up and get lunch? And my professor was like, sure, absolutely. And I was like, yes, because this is really my favorite professor. She was my thesis advisor and just truly like one of my favorite people on the planet. And overall, my college town is one of my favorite places in the world. It's a small town in Indiana called Greencastle, and it's just like a very magical place for me. And I've been a lot of different places in the world, and every time I come back to Greencastle, it's kind of like a healing experience, or it's kind of like coming back home. Really, in a lot of ways, Greencastle is a place for me where I feel that like strong, like I'm home when I'm in that place. And that's probably indicative of, I loved my college experience. There were obviously obvious struggles that every college person has, but overall, my college experience was such a positive one. I loved my school. It was really a beautiful, a beautiful experience. So I always enjoy going back to Greencastle. And I was thinking like, all right, I'm seeing my professor. She's a writing professor. So I ended up leaving at Virgo rising, at 10 degrees Virgo rising, from my friend's house, traveling to Greencastle, Indiana. And what's interesting here is that the ascendant ruler is ruled by Mercury in the 10th house in its domicile. The moon is also in Gemini. So approaching that conjunction with Mercury. Also, we've got the South Node in Gemini and the MC in Gemini. So I felt like this was kind of like a good vibe for going back and seeing my writing professor. What's also kind of funny about this chart is that Jupiter is in the seventh house, and Jupiter is almost exactly conjunct my natal moon at this point. And I have my natal moon in the ninth house. So it's kind of funny. Like I'm seeing my professor at the time when Jupiter is conjunct my natal moon in my ninth house. It was kind of a perfect chart. It was kind of a no-brainer. Like I knew this is when I was going to leave. And it ended up being like just a really healing moment to just be back in Greencastle, being back with my favorite professor, having lunch with her, catching up with her. She happened to give me her birth time, which was really, really exciting. And I found out she actually happens to be a Gemini, which is funny that the chart ruler is in Gemini. But what's so interesting is that I was able to cast her chart and look at arsonistry, and her ascendant, the degree of her ascendant is conjunct my Jupiter, and the degree of her moon is conjunct my ascendant. So it was just like, it almost made me cry, like getting that birth information from her. I'm so glad I have it. It's kind of a nerdy astrologer thing, but I think just collecting that birth time was really a beautiful moment. And what does the moon do in Gemini? It collects. So I collected that birth time, and she also gave me back some papers that I wrote like 5 years ago. And, these are some papers she never gave me back. So I received I received some papers from her, which was kind of funny. If you knew this professor, you would laugh because that is very much something she would do, like saving everybody's papers and things like that. And, after we parted ways, I decided to hang out in my college town just for a couple hours. There's like this beautiful nature park in Greencastle, Indiana, that is sort of like a limestone quarry. And it's just like a really beautiful place. So I went to the nature park and I had like a little bit of a meditation, a little transcendent experience before getting back on the road and going back to my house. But it was a beautiful time. I don't necessarily know where that nature connection shows up. Maybe it's that fourth house ruled by Jupiter, like that kind of feeling of just being at home in nature. But overall, it was a very healing kind of end to my road trip, especially after the previous chart ruled by that Venus Mars conjunction. Okay. So that's what I've got for you, my friends. I hope you enjoyed my summer road trip stories. We definitely had some successes. We definitely made some mistakes. I would love to know, have you ever elected a road trip? How did it turn out? Where was the moon? What was the ruler of your ascendant? Have you ever had a road trip go wrong and looked back at the chart later and kind of, seen, oh my God, this is crazy. This is why it went wrong. And so, and I always do this. I will nominate any other electional astrology students who are watching this. I'm tagging you to do this same kind of video, and please let us know about any elected travel experiences during the summer of 2021. And I would love to watch your video because it helps me learn as well. So friends, have a great day. I'll be back with more electional content once my summer course is over, and then I'll be releasing a review of my summer course election and how that ended up going. sneak peek, it ended up going really well. I think I'm getting really good at electing classes. At least road trips we're still working on, but classes are going pretty well. So thanks for watching, my friends.